After moving into our newly built house and finishing the unpacking, another moving truck suddenly parked in front of our home. Then my husband dropped a bombshell.
Starting today, my parents will also live with us.
Huh?
If you oppose this, divorce is the answer.
I burst into laughter and quipped. Well, we might as well be divorced already, right?
Huh?
This incident occurred right after we moved into our new home, and I had already left my husband and in-laws behind. I am Olivia, in my 30s. I married my husband, Michael, 5 years ago, and our son, Liam, is now 4 years old. Initially, I quit my job when we got married, but when our son turned 4, I decided to return to work. I now work full-time on weekdays. When I first met my husband, he was kind, laid back, and perhaps a bit oblivious at times. Back then, I thought these traits were just part of his personality. Above all, I was drawn to the fact that he always put me first, which led us to get married. However, I later realized that my compatibility with my in-laws was far from ideal. They seemed more concerned with appearances than genuinely considering others. Their thinking was one-sided and self-centered. The first sign of trouble came during wedding preparations. They insisted on having a grand wedding because my husband was the eldest son in the family. I preferred a modest celebration with close friends and family, but they argued that such a wedding would be embarrassing and not fitting for their family background. Ironically, my husband's family wasn't particularly well off. My father-in-law was a retired office worker, and mother-in-law was a homemaker. Their house wasn't large either. They had been renting all along. Yet, they insisted on putting up a facade. In the end, they said they'd cover the whole expenses, and without consulting me, they booked a lavish venue. To avoid conflict, I went along with their wishes and had an extravagant reception. However, the result was that only the groom's side covered the costs. Ultimately, my family ended up paying for the bride's side. Even during childbirth, it was the same. When I was enduring labor pains at the hospital, my mother-in-law arrived and immediately said,
"What? The baby isn't born yet? You said you were having contractions, so I came all the way here." Ugh, how boring.
She proceeded to engage in trivial small talk endlessly by my bedside. Of course, I was in too much pain to pay attention, but she persisted, saying,
"Hey, Olivia, are you listening?"
My husband, on the other hand, just stood there without uttering a word. Before we got married, I appreciated his laid-back nature, but now it feels less like laid-back and more like obliviousness. Well, perhaps he simply assumes that his parents' way of thinking is the norm. And after childbirth, the inconsiderate behavior of my mother-in-law and father-in-law continued. Despite it being shortly after giving birth, they stayed late at our house, making noise under the guise of celebrating. My father-in-law even demanded,
"Hey, prepare some snacks."
When our son cried, no one bothered to comfort him. Given this situation, I found myself disliking my in-laws and tried to limit our interactions to the bare minimum. However, a certain incident led me to become more deeply involved with them. We, as a family of 3, were living in a rental apartment. However, as our son grew older, we began considering purchasing a newly built house. Yet, the process of building a house involves various meetings, from land selection to working with construction companies and interior design. Since my husband and I both work, it was challenging to schedule meetings during weekdays. As a result, we always arranged these meetings for weekends. However, having our son present during lengthy discussions was difficult, so we often relied on my parents, who lived nearby, to take care of him. One day, we had a meeting scheduled for the next day, but my mother informed me that she had caught a cold and didn't want to risk passing it to our son. Now, I was torn between canceling the meeting or taking our son along. That's when my husband suggested,
Why not leave him with my parents occasionally?
Personally, I wasn't keen on relying too much on my in-laws. However, without considering my opinion, my husband picked up the phone and started making arrangements.
Hey, it's me. Sorry for the sudden request, but could you take care of Liam tomorrow? I'll bring some souvenirs as well.
I feel bad about this sudden change.
It's fine.
But my oblivious husband simply said, and hung up. At that moment, I had a vague sense of foreboding. On the day of our meeting, I took our son to my in-laws' house in the morning and then proceeded to the scheduled appointment. On our way back, I brought my in-laws their favorite sweets as a gift. I was eager to head home, but as expected, I got caught in a conversation trap.
Hey, you're building a house, right? What kind of house is it?
A built-in kitchen. Ha! Young people these days. It'll make your life easier, won't it?
My husband unintentionally blurted out.
Olivia is handling all the kitchen details.
My mother-in-law glanced at me and said,
Well, I'd love to try out a beautiful kitchen too.
So, with a smile, I suggested, why not consider remodeling your kitchen, too? To which she retorted,
We don't have that kind of money. Rather, I wish you would remodel for me as a way of showing filial piety.
Ignoring my discomfort, my husband casually added,
When our house is finished, you can come see it. You're welcome to use it.
Personally, I dreaded the idea of others using my kitchen. And so, the interrogation about our new house continued until we were finally released 2 hours later. On our way home, feeling uneasy, I asked my husband, Hey, your parents seem overly concerned about our house. But we're not actually living together, right? His response was matter of fact.
It's our family home. I said the kitchen is your domain, didn't I?
So, I believed him. From that day on, my in-laws began offering to take care of our son during our meetings. While I appreciated their help, they always managed to meddle in our home affairs afterward.
Show me the blueprints.
He started asking questions like,
How spacious is the bathroom?
or,
What's the size of the guest room?
he even offered unsolicited advice about the future, saying,
You should install handrails in the entrance for peace of mind during old age.
My mother-in-law chimed in, suggesting,
Wouldn't a living room be more comfortable here?
or,
What's the height of the kitchen counter?
when I tell her the height, she said,
Oh, that would be inconvenient for me. You should make it a bit lower.
I couldn't help but reply. I adjusted it to the height that is comfortable for me. But my father-in-law interjected,
It's not just you who'll use it. Michael will live here too, so you need to consider everyone's comfort.
Everyone? We're not designing the house to accommodate occasional visitors. Desperate for support, I looked at my husband, but he remained silent, accepting their words without objection. Whose house are we building, anyway? Because of these repeated exchanges, I grew exhausted. So, I consulted my husband, saying, Can we stop leaving Liam with your parents? It's also frustrating that they keep interfering with our new house plans. However, my husband dismissed my concerns, saying,
Having them take care of Liam is helpful. Just tolerate their nagging a bit. You're my wife, after all.
But your parents are imposing their opinions too much. It's as if they think they'll be living here. Surely we're not considering cohabitation? In a half-exasperated tone, my husband snapped.
I said we'd live as a family, didn't I? Stop being so persistent. If you keep complaining, we'll get a divorce. Divorce.
What on earth was he saying? It was my in-laws who suddenly intruded into our new house plans. Yet somehow, our conversations always veered toward divorce. Since that day, my husband's threats of divorce increased with every issue that arose. On another day, after a meeting, my in-laws visited our home and began discussing our new house. My father-in-law suggested,
Hey, shouldn't we change the location of the bathroom?
Yes, maybe it's better to move it over here. Should we ask the design firm for changes?
Even my husband seemed ready to make a phone call. Feeling cornered, I asserted, we've already made decisions. In response, my father-in-law grew angry.
Who do you think you are? You know nothing about house matters. Listen to the opinions of your elders.
Exactly. We're advising you for your own good.
Rather than coming to my aid, my husband casually said,
Yeah, let's consider their advice.
It seems I'm stuck in a whirlwind of opinions. Then my father-in-law looked at me and said,
Hey, Michael, couldn't you have married someone more understanding?
Dad, don't say that. Come on, Olivia, apologize. Otherwise, we'll get a divorce.
It left me dumbfounded. I thought, enough is enough. Despite my efforts to avoid interactions with my in-laws due to our incompatible personalities, we've been seeing them more frequently lately. Unfortunately, my husband has become increasingly aligned with his parents, leaving me with no ally. The kind Michael I once knew has vanished, replaced by a puppet manipulated by my in-laws. When we decided to build our new house, I was excited about our future life together. But now, meetings are torture, and conversations with my in-laws feel like hell. Yet, if I dare confide in my husband, he responds with threats of divorce. Once, half-jokingly or perhaps seriously, he even handed me a pre-filled divorce form, saying,
Your attitude toward my parents is unbearable. They're offering advice, and they take good care of Liam. If your behavior doesn't improve, I'll seriously divorce you.
I was left speechless. It's clear that he'll always side with his parents, no matter what. Moreover, my husband claims that my in-laws take good care of our son, but that's only during our meetings. The ones who genuinely look after our son are my own parents. They've been there for sudden nursery school emergencies and difficult times. When I fell ill, they'd come over to care for our son. My parents even prepare gifts for birthdays and Christmas. In contrast, my in-laws have never given our son anything. Instead, when they visit, they demand,
Bring us a souvenir.
My husband doesn't understand any of this. Feeling worn out, I finally visited my parents' home. Clearly, I looked exhausted, and my mother asked in concern,
What's wrong?
So, I mustered the courage to share my current situation. To my relief, my mother said,
If anything happens, you can always come back here.
It was a comforting response. Yes, I don't need to force myself into that family any longer. I just need to make a decision. But we have our son, and we're building a new house. However, given the current situation, it feels like my in-laws might eventually take over our new home. If that happens, I'll be subjected to their verbal abuse for life, all while being taken advantage of by them. I can't bear that. Yet, if I bring up divorce now, my husband will likely reject the idea. Despite his constant talk of divorce, my husband and in-laws are concerned about appearances, so divorcing him won't be straightforward. That's when I had an idea. And so, I began preparing for the worst. Finally, our newly built house is complete, and today my husband, our son, and I came for a viewing. Our son is happily running around, exclaiming,
"Yay! Our new home."
"The house smells fresh, and I'm thrilled that my ideal home has finally become a reality." We had a brief meeting with my husband to discuss moving in, and we decided that the second floor would have a guest room and our son's room. However, since we don't plan to use it immediately, I thought we'd just use it as a place to store our belongings for now. I mentioned this to my husband, but he simply said,
"Make sure to organize the stuff properly."
Despite my casual response, I already felt suspicious about my husband's behavior. On moving day, we transported our belongings as planned and began unpacking. Since I expected a busy day, our son is staying with my parents. Suddenly, I noticed my husband was nowhere to be found. Searching for him, I saw him on the phone. He was saying things like,
"What? You're already coming? We're not done unpacking yet."
At that moment, I thought, oh, are my in-laws coming again? But soon after, a moving truck pulled up in front of our house. I wondered if the mover had forgotten something. Just then, the doorbell rang. I answered the intercom, and there stood my in-laws. To my surprise, my in-laws arrived with their belongings in tow. My father-in-law barged in, demanding,
Hey, is everything sorted?
Oh dear, nothing is organized at all. Olivia alone won't cut it.
Behind them stood a mover, clutching protective covers typically used during relocation. The mover politely asked,
"Hello, may we begin our work?"
"Work? What work?" I wondered. But my in-laws instructed the mover.
Go ahead.
And then suddenly, our home was invaded by workers. I confronted my husband, asking, "What's going on?" He nonchalantly replied,
"Oh, we're starting cohabitation today. You know, they've been looking after our son, and it'll be easier for us all to live together."
"Huh? We never discussed this." I protested. My husband continued,
"Well, I'm the head of this household, and my parents have been advising us about this house. Besides, Mom wants to live here too."
His casual tone infuriated me. "What? This is our family's home for the three of us, right? There's no room for your parents."
I'll take the largest room on the second floor.
And the one next to it will be mine.
She added,
I measured it recently. Do the curtains fit?
I couldn't believe it. They were already claiming rooms in our new house. Measurements? When was that? I asked my husband. Hey, could it be that your parents have been here before? Isn't this their first time seeing the house?
Huh? They actually came the day before we did the house tour.
What? Why?
They wanted to see it, so I gave them the keys to take a look ahead of time.
Unbelievable. My in-laws had explored the house before we even moved in. They even decided on their own room and took measurements. I felt anger welling up deep inside me. Hey, why didn't you consult with me? Isn't this our home for the three of us? Besides, Liam's room will be gone.
Ha! He won't use that room right away. And the guest room is for when someone visits, right? So it's fine if my parents use it. Besides, I said it before, this new house is for the whole family to live in. And when we say family, that includes my parents.
Wait. Did you deceive me?
You're just misunderstanding. I'm the homeowner, so stop complaining.
As my husband and I engaged in this exchange, my in-laws joined the fray.
What's wrong with you? Are you against us living here? How insolent for a daughter-in-law!
Such an unfilial daughter-in-law. It's only natural for children to care for their parents. You're part of our family now, so you should take care of us.
But that's not the point. Originally, this house was meant for our family of 3 to live in. Even the kitchen was designed with me in mind.
Well, isn't that fine? After all, you'll be handling household chores in this house, won't you?
As a daughter-in-law, isn't it natural to take care of the household?
Then does that mean you won't do any housework?
Of course not! It's only natural for a daughter-in-law to take care of household matters. Michael, if she keeps opposing us like this, get a divorce!
Don't talk back to my parents. I'm serious about getting a divorce.
Certainly, that line finally came up. So, you're thinking of divorce, right?
Huh?
My husband responded with a puzzle. I couldn't help but burst into laughter. I faced him and said, "We might as well be divorced already." My husband and in-laws had a look of shock on their faces. Although I haven't submitted it yet, so it's just on paper, I handed him the divorce papers.
Huh?
It was a fully filled out divorce form. He looked at it and stammered.
What's this?
I reminded him. Remember how you've been threatening me with "we'll get a divorce" all the time? Well, there you go. I've filled it out too.
Oh, that was just a joke.
You've been threatening me daily with divorce. How can that be a joke?
We're married, aren't we? A joke like that should be fine.
It would be fine if it were a funny joke. But how can threats like that be taken as a joke? Besides, I have recorded all our conversations and threats.
Huh?
I'll take this to a lawyer and proceed with the divorce properly.
Hey, what about the house?
He panicked, asking about the house. I replied firmly. I wanted to live in this house with you and Liam. But clearly, you had other plans. If you want to live with your parents so badly, go ahead. Oh, and when we divorce, make sure to repay the $30,000 I lent for the down payment. And lump sum child support too. I'll be raising Liam. With that, I opened a box containing essential items for my son and me, a traveling bag and a backpack, for whatever comes next. Yes, I had been waiting for this moment. As I suspected, my in-laws had intentions of taking over the house. And my husband, too, conspired with them to deceive me. In that case, divorce seemed to be my only option. However, my husband, born into a family that values appearances, wouldn't readily agree to a divorce. So, I came up with a plan involving the divorce papers he had prepared. Although he probably intended it as an empty threat, he had meticulously filled out the divorce form. I decided to play along. But submitting it silently risked invalidating the divorce, so I secretly recorded our conversations to confirm his genuine intent. Perhaps my husband believed I lacked the courage to go through with it. True, Divorcing while raising our young son wouldn't be easy. But I wasn't alone. My parents supported me, and most importantly, I worried about our son's well-being if we continued living with that family. So, divorce and separation seemed like the best course of action. I packed my bags and went to my parents' home, explaining the situation. They assured me, "You're welcome to stay here." Then, I entrusted my son to them and visited a lawyer's office. I showed them the divorce papers, the recorded conversations, and requested legal proceedings. A week after leaving our newly built home, my husband called repeatedly. Avoiding his calls, I let the answering machine collect numerous messages. His voicemails consisted of demands about the mortgage.
What are you thinking? Come back soon.
Yet there were no apologies, no concern for our son, and no mention of driving out my in-laws. My husband has no intention of kicking out his parents after all that has happened. He is only worried about the mortgage. Of course, there's a reason for that. My husband doesn't have any savings. You see, he spends money on his hobbies like casinos and horse racing. Despite initially promising to save before building the house, all we have was my pre-marriage savings of $30,000. When I confronted him about it, he nonchalantly said,
"Oops, my bad. If I put the mortgage in my name, it'll be fine."
But I couldn't tolerate his carefree attitude, so I made him sign a loan agreement. It was a formality because he had borrowed $30,000 from me, and I wanted proper repayment. Although he underestimated the seriousness of financial transactions between spouses, he eventually complied. Little did I know that this precautionary document would come in handy. When we applied for the mortgage, we used my savings as the down payment, but the loan was in his name. However, I suspect he was counting on my income too. Perhaps he planned to burden me with all the living expenses after inviting his parents. Given how frugal my in-laws are, I doubt they'd contribute anything toward daily costs. I just want to make sure that I receive the money I lent and the child support in full. I had no intention of speaking to that family anymore, so I entrusted all the legal proceedings to a lawyer. Of course, I showed them the loan agreement my husband had signed, and I fully intend to collect what's owed. Honestly, I was prepared for his request to split child support payments. However, my prideful in-laws insisted on paying it all at once, saying they wanted to sever ties with such a dreadful daughter-in-law. But how could they manage that without any savings? They probably borrowed from some shady source at exorbitant interest rates. Well, that's none of my concern. In the days that followed, I learned that my husband's family decided not to live in the newly built house and put it up for sale. Perhaps they found it difficult to keep up with the mortgage payments after I left. And there's the matter of their suspicious debts too. As it turns out, my husband and in-laws, who are strapped for cash, are now renting a small apartment. Despite finally acquiring a fancy kitchen, my mother-in-law won't get much use out of it. She's too short for the height I customized. Furthermore, my divorced sister-in-law and her kids have returned to her parents' home. She's been a stay-at-home mom for years and has no intention of working. Her children, a middle schooler and an elementary schooler, will now squeeze into that cramped space. Their living expenses rely solely on my ex-husband's earnings and his parents' pension. But with my husband drowning in debt, there's no room for flexibility. According to rumors, it seems that my ex-in-laws are constantly arguing due to the increased family size, and the noise has become a nuisance for the neighbors. My ex-sister-in-law expressed frustration, saying,
"I heard we could live in the new house. So why is this happening?"
I wanted to use the modern kitchen and live in the new house.
If you keep complaining, I'll hit the jackpot and buy anything, even a house.
Unfortunately, It appears he's delved deeper into his long-standing gambling hobby and accumulated more debt. There are whispers that he might have even borrowed from shadier sources. It's a pitiable situation. However, considering my ex-husband's unwavering support for his parents, he's reaping what he sowed. As for me, I now live in a rental apartment near my workplace with my son. When I work late, my parents support my son, which puts my mind at ease. Over time, I've been promoted, and my salary has increased. I'm saving up the extra income to treat my son and parents to a relaxing stay at a high-end hotel. Unlike someone else, I'll express my gratitude to the parents who've always supported me while finding happiness.
How did you find this story? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Until next time in the next video.
Mom gave me this. She told me to let you read it when you're all alone.
My 8-year-old granddaughter offered me a small booklet, the size of her hand. My daughter collapsed suddenly a week ago and remains bedridden and has not woken up. The doctors say that the symptoms are unexplained and there is nothing they can do.
Mom told me yesterday. She said it had been hidden under the bed in our house.
My granddaughter, who has had a mysterious power since she was a little girl, sometimes uttered unexpected words. And those words were definitely true. I immediately checked the contents of my daughter's booklet. No way. Then, I found a horrifying story that made my hair stand on end. My name is Ari and I am 65 years old. I have lived alone since my husband passed away 15 years ago, but I have never felt lonely. This was because my daughter and her husband and granddaughter live in an apartment 10 minutes away from my house by car, and I saw them often. Cindy and her husband Dan are both 37 years old. They are both nurses working at the same hospital and got married 10 years ago after an office romance. 2 years later, their granddaughter Anne was born, and she had a strange power that most people do not have.
And has a special power that is different from other children.
The daughter who said this told me that my granddaughter could hear voices that no normal person should be able to hear. I did not want to doubt my daughter, but I could not easily believe something unscientific. At first, I thought it must have been just a coincidence or a misunderstanding on my daughter's part. It was when my granddaughter was 5 years old that I witnessed its power. It was when I went with her to visit the grave of my husband who had passed away in an accident. As I was offering my husband's favorite roses, my granddaughter said, "That's not right." She shook her head.
Grandpa wants to see carnations.
My husband loved carnations as much as roses before he died, but I had never mentioned it to my granddaughter. I froze for a moment in surprise. Oh, and who told you what Grandpa's favorite flower was?
Grandpa just told me that he's not in the mood for roses today.
She pointed to my husband's grave, and I stared at her in amazement. At the time I was still half convinced of my granddaughter's power, but then something happened a short time later that forced me to believe in her power. It happened when I went to the supermarket with my daughter and granddaughter. As we passed by a pregnant woman shopping, my granddaughter suddenly turned around and shouted loudly,
"Wait! Your baby is in pain and crying. Go to the hospital right away."
My granddaughter stopped by our neighbor, a woman who was also familiar with my daughter. She was standing there with a blank look on her face, and my granddaughter pleaded with her to hurry. Then, the daughter rushed to them and said,
"Thinking you've been tricked, will you go to the hospital with me now?"
and started rushing her. I thought she was going to scold my granddaughter for saying something outrageous, but I could not hide my surprise. "Hey Cindy, don't you think you're overreacting?"
No, it's not, because if Anne is pleading so hard, there's definitely something going on.
Then my daughter took some time and somehow convinced the woman. When they went with her to her OB/GYN clinic, they discovered that the umbilical cord was entangled in the baby's neck. The woman had to have an emergency C-section and was able to deliver the baby safely. If she had left it alone, the baby's life would have been in danger, and she and her family were very grateful for my granddaughter. Since then, I have come to believe in Anne's magical powers. However, my daughter asked me to keep this a family secret and I did not tell anyone. And that mysterious power would later cause a terrible tragedy. It all started one fine holiday. It was when my daughter came to visit my house with my granddaughter.
I brought cookies for you.
Wow, thank you. Are they by any chance Anne's homemade?
I made them with my mom. Hey, Mom.
My granddaughter asked, smiling, but my daughter did not respond. And looked up at Cindy, who did not respond, with a curious look on her face, and asked again,
Mom?
She looked up at Cindy again with a curious look on her face and replied,
Yes, I guess so.
She replied. I wondered what was wrong with her. It was not like Cindy. I felt uncomfortable that my daughter, who usually expresses her love for her child to the best of her ability, was being so curt with her. She continued to act strangely after that, and no matter what I tried to say to her, all she would say was, well, or yeah, as if she was not in the right place at all. I sensed that something was wrong with my daughter. I asked her, Hey, are you okay? If you have any problems or concerns, just tell me. My daughter seemed lost for a while, but then she opened her mouth with a troubled look on her face.
Actually, Dan and I had a fight.
It was the night before that day. My son-in-law, who had seen a program about a child with psychic powers, suddenly said,
Let's use Anne's powers to make money.
The daughter said,
If she has this power, she'll pull out the TV. If she has this power, she'll be all over TV. He's all excited about how he's going to become a billionaire.
Hearing my daughter sigh in exasperation as she spoke, I frowned. It was obvious that if I did that, my granddaughter would be exposed to the world, and I couldn't very well agree to that. Treating Anne like a money-making tool is absolutely wrong. My daughter nodded her head and said, I understand, as I strongly pleaded with her. She thought it was up to Anne herself to decide when she was older whether or not she wanted to make her magical powers known to the public. I agreed with her and was relieved that Cindy had some common sense in her thinking. Have you told Dan how you feel?
Yes, but he didn't seem too convinced.
She really still wanted to discuss it, but her granddaughter, who had been sleeping, woke up and the conversation became moot. I was even angry at my son-in-law, but my daughter said she would not question him any further now.
We were just talking the other day about how we want to build a house soon, and I think he's just temporarily feeling more comfortable with money.
My daughter defends Dan by saying so. If Cindy, his wife, is like that, it is not for me to say. I decided to trust my daughter's judgment that my son-in-law's comment was a temporary distraction. A few days later, something unforgivable happened that I could not think of in that way. That day I was at a big park with my daughter, her husband, and my granddaughter. I was concerned about my son-in-law, but I was relieved that it was an unnecessary worry, as both my granddaughter and daughter were treating each other as usual and enjoying themselves as a family. However, that was a big mistake. The moment my daughter left my granddaughter's side to go to the bathroom, my son-in-law took her to the square where there was a street performance. As I followed him, wondering what was going on, my son-in-law suddenly picked up my granddaughter in his arms and lifted her as high as he could. Then, he took an extraordinary action.
This kid has a mysterious power. She can hear the baby in her mother's belly.
Showing and held up high to the people around her, the son-in-law shouted out loud while moving in a circle around her. I was so surprised that my son-in-law started to do something so strange that I froze for a moment, but I immediately grabbed his arm to stop him. "Hey, stop it!"
It's none of your business. Don't interrupt me.
He didn't listen at all and shook my hand off.
This kid is the child of God.
He raised his voice even higher. Families and elderly couples walking in the park were glancing at us as if they were looking at something strange. I was rapidly becoming impatient, and just as I was about to do something to stop them, my daughter came dashing back when she heard my son-in-law yelling.
What are you doing? Put it down right now.
My daughter stormed at my son-in-law with great force. Overwhelmed by Cindy's anger, the son-in-law reluctantly put down his granddaughter. My granddaughter, who had been held in his arms forcibly and roughly pushed around, was on the verge of tears.
Anne, are you okay?
That was scary.
My daughter stared at my son-in-law with a stern face as she hugged my granddaughter with tears filling her eyes. However, my son-in-law turned away and pretended not to know. Cindy knew she couldn't go on like this, and when and calmed down, she said,
"I'll talk to him for a minute,"
and left the place. While we were waiting for them, my granddaughter and I decided to go to a place with a lot of playground equipment and play. At first, my granddaughter still looked a little frightened, but as we played together, she regained her energy, which was a relief. A short time later, it was only my daughter who returned to us. She told me that her son-in-law had left sulking after an argument with Cindy. While I was listening to her story, I noticed a fresh scrape on my daughter's elbow. What happened to that injury?
Actually, Dan got mad and pushed me.
Really? Are you okay?
I'm fine, and we'll talk about it when we get home, so don't worry.
I told my granddaughter not to worry. Dad went to work suddenly. After that, just the three of us played together until the sun went down. To be honest, I was full of anxiety. I wanted to call my son-in-law and say something to him, but I thought he would feel bad if I, his mother-in-law, spoke out of turn, so I decided not to say anything. A few days later, I received a sudden call from my son-in-law. Shockingly, he informed me that our daughter had collapsed and was unconscious. She was perfectly fine when we last met. Why? Our daughter had been transported to the hospital where Dan worked, and I hurried there. Despite various tests, the cause of her collapse remained unknown, and she continued to sleep without waking up. I visited her every day, and during one of those visits, I encountered my son-in-law, who had been checking on our daughter's condition between work hours. I had taken comfort in the fact that he cared about our daughter even after our arguments, but later, I would discover that this was a significant misunderstanding. A week after our daughter collapsed, a significant event occurred. Our granddaughter, who had been visiting with us during our daughter's hospital stay, discreetly handed me a booklet.
"Grandma, take a look at this,"
she whispered. She glanced around, ensuring no one was nearby, and seemed quite cautious. "What's this?"
"It's from Mom. She said you should read it when you're alone,"
our granddaughter explained. "But when did she give this to you?"
"Yesterday. Mom told me it's hidden under the bed at home.
Yesterday, our daughter was already in a coma. Our granddaughter claimed she heard Cindy's voice using her mysterious ability. Perhaps it's akin to a sixth sense. As soon as I picked up the booklet, I felt a shiver run down my spine. No way. Fearfully, I opened the booklet and found something terrible written in it. Immediately, I became suspicious of my daughter's sudden collapse, and examined her body, which was still asleep. I looked at her head, face, and body in order, but there was nothing unusual. However, just to be sure, I took off her underwear and found something extraordinary. Unable to stand still, I immediately went to my daughter's house we entered the house with my granddaughter's duplicate key and decided to thoroughly inspect the inside. I noticed a laptop computer on a desk in the corner of the living room. Curious, I decided to take a look at it, but it was locked.
Grandma, look behind the desk.
My granddaughter said to me as I was at a loss. I looked behind the desk as she told me, and found a piece of paper with a PIN number written on it. A few days earlier, she had dropped her pencil under the desk while doing her homework and found the paper by accident. I can't believe he keeps track of his passwords this way. My son-in-law must have changed his password so often that he could not remember it himself. So much so that there is something in here that should not be seen by others. Fearfully, I typed in the numbers on the paper, and the computer started up. As I carefully looked at its contents one by one, I discovered something unimaginable in a file at the edge of the screen. Oh no! What is this? The moment I saw it, I made up my mind that I would definitely grab the tail of the culprit who put my daughter in that state. And after executing one of my plans, I arranged for Cindy to be transferred to another hospital. Then that night, my son-in-law came over to my house in a great hurry.
Why did you transfer Cindy to another hospital?
He was so angry that he shouted at the top of his lungs, not caring about the neighbor's eyes even though he was on our doorstep. I thought it was the right thing to do, so I discussed it with her doctor and decided to do it. When I replied nonchalantly, his son-in-law raised his voice.
Don't do anything selfish.
My son-in-law raised his voice.
I brought her all the way to the hospital where I work because I wanted to be close by and talk to her every day.
The son-in-law lowered his eyebrows in an exaggerated manner and mumbled with a look that said he was worried about his daughter. I was so disgusted by his expression that I couldn't contain myself and stormed over to him the next moment. No way! You tried to send Cindy to the other side of the world.
What? What are you talking about all of a sudden?
After a moment of wide-eyed impatience, I silently offered something to my son-in-law, who immediately turned red and became angry. It was my daughter's booklet that I had secretly received from my granddaughter. The first part of the diary was a bland one, but after a certain day, it became all about my son-in-law. Just from the day you said you wanted to use and as a money-making tool. The daughter's diary said,
Dan has been acting strange since we had the fight about Anne. He has become unfriendly and cold. Dan seems to be sneaking around on the computer looking up things. I can't help but feel uneasy.
This is just a small part of the story, but I could see how my daughter was growing more anxious and distressed as the days went by. When I think of Cindy at this time, it is heartbreaking. However, in direct contrast to me, my son-in-law expressed his displeasure.
I didn't behave that way. It's just my wife's self-serving assumption.
The son-in-law looked annoyed and said, but such an excuse would not work. But such an excuse was not going to cut it, because on a page further down in the booklet something terrible was written. Then what do you mean by this sentence? Something like a syringe needle had fallen out, then I questioned him about it. He acted suspiciously.
Eh?
The son-in-law clearly looks upset. I read this section of the booklet and knew I had to do a thorough search of my daughter's house. And as a result, I found something extraordinary. What is this thing I found in your room? I confronted my son-in-law with a notebook with the word plan written on the cover. This notebook was filled with instructions on how to send my daughter to the other side of the world. When I showed it to my son-in-law, he broke out in a sweat on his forehead and said in a hoarse voice,
"That's not mine."
He shouted at the top of his voice. It was obvious that he was in a great hurry, and no matter how much he denied it, it sounded like he was saying, "It's mine."
Why would I want Cindy gone?
Oh my God, why?
I love her, and there would be no reason for me to do that in the first place.
It was obvious that what he was saying was a lie. Because he had more than enough reasons to want to bury my daughter. I had heard from my granddaughter that they had had a rather heated marital argument shortly before Cindy's collapse. They were at odds over Anne's mysterious powers, no matter how many times my daughter tried to convince my son-in-law.
I'm going to use Anne as a tool of my business and become a millionaire.
And he did not listen to her. She was against it and would never break, so you decided to take her in your hands, didn't you?
And made up that story on her own. I bet she made up that plan as a prank too.
How could an 8-year-old kid plan something like this? Besides, I found syringe marks on Cindy's body. How are you going to explain this? When I examined every inch of my daughter's body as she lay in her hospital room, I found something extraordinary. It was the injection marks. What's more, that's not all I found. When I found the computer at my daughter's house, I checked his online purchase history and found evidence of large quantities of nuts, chemicals, and syringes. Those nuts are used as a spice in cooking, but in large doses they can cause drowsiness. My son-in-law mixed a large amount of it in her food, put my daughter to sleep, and had her rushed to the hospital where he worked. Since it was the hospital where he worked, it was easy for him to secretly falsify the results of various tests. Since his daughter and son-in-law have the same blood type, he exchanged Cindy's blood with his own that he had originally prepared. In this way, after hospitalizing his daughter, he kept putting her to sleep with this and that, and tried to extinguish Cindy's life by injecting drugs little by little with a syringe. All these plans were written down in the notebook.
I don't know anything. Please don't make me the bad guy when you have no proof that the notebook is mine.
He was still trying to keep his mouth shut at this point, but we still had a trump card left. Well, I'll show you the definitive proof. As soon as I played back the recording, his face turned blue and his stubborn attitude turned into a panic.
Oh my God. Why is this thing on there?
I showed my son-in-law a video that showed him in the hospital room putting something into my daughter's IV. Upon seeing the booklet and the plan, I was convinced that my son-in-law was trying to make Cindy disappear, and I immediately set up a small hidden camera in my daughter's hospital room. I made that footage available to my phone in real time and checked the video every 10 minutes. Then, a few hours after setting up the camera, I was able to record the decisive moment.
This was just the injection of a drug that the doctor had ordered.
There is no use in telling such a lie. Immediately after I saw this video, I asked the doctor to retrieve the IV and analyze the ingredients inside. As a result, I found out that it was mixed with a dangerous chemical that the hospital did not have. Then, having perfectly caught my son-in-law at the scene of the crime, I immediately transferred Cindy to a different hospital. Now there will be no more excuses.
Damn. I shouldn't have injected her IV just because it was too much trouble to take off her clothes.
Throwing himself down, the son-in-law spat that out, then scratched his head and kicked the front door with all his might. You mean to say that you admit that you did all this?
Oh, no, no. It's wrong. Not at all.
Although he became impatient at his own careless remark, he could think of no excuse and just kept repeating the same words. However, no matter how much he tries to talk his way out of it now, it is futile. I have already filed a damage report and submitted these evidences to the police, so an investigation should have started by now. You will be arrested soon. The son-in-law, with a look of despair on his face as he realized that there was nothing left for him to do, made a series of exaggerated apologies to show for it.
Please forgive me. How can I make it right for you to forgive me?
I looked down at him with cold eyes, having no intention of forgiving him when he did that.
I won't use it as a business tool anymore, and I will take good care of Cindy too. Please withdraw the damage report.
Even after saying this, my son-in-law kept making excuses, apologizing, and jumbled up his words. However, none of his words touched my heart, and on the contrary, only my discomfort grew. You're depressing me, so I want you to leave. I coldly pushed away my son-in-law who was clinging to me, and his face looked as if it was the end of the world.
Wait.
I pushed him, who was still trying to say something, out of the doorway, and with my arms full of disgust for him, I vigorously closed the door. Shortly thereafter, my son-in-law was arrested and Cindy and he divorced. My daughter has retained an attorney and is suing him for a total of $70,000 in alimony and child support. What he did was deemed so malicious that he will not be able to come out from behind bars for a while. My daughter woke up soon after being transferred to the new hospital, and she recovered quickly and is now completely healthy. Now I live with my granddaughter and the three of us live together in peace.
What did you think of this story? Please subscribe to our channel. See you in the next video.